Every time you click sign in with Google or sign in with Microsoft on a website, or you log into your company's Salesforce without typing a password, there is a single sign-on happening in the background. But did you ever think that how does it all work? So in this video, we will figure out what are the SSO protocols, for example, like SAML, OIDC, or OAuth. Also, we will set up each of these protocols in a lab environment live in this video so that you can also follow along and set them up on your own. So before we jump into demo, my name is Srinath. I've been working in identity and access management over the last 18 years. Let me quickly explain each of these protocols with a simple examples. Imagine you are going to a concert. Your employee has a deal with the venue of the concert. You show up, flash your corporate badge, and they let you in because they trust your employer. You never have to buy a ticket or book a seat. One trusted organization, your employer, tells another organization like the concert organizing company that this is a legit employee, let them in. That is SAML. OIDC is different. It is like showing a government ID at a party so that bouncer checks it and lets you in. You prove who you are with a widely accepted standard government issued ID. That is OIDC. It works because everyone agrees to the particular standard. Now let's come to the last protocol, OAuth. OAuth is like giving your friend keys to your car to drive to the library and back, only for the afternoon. You are not giving them identity, you are giving them limited permission to do a particular task for a particular time. That is OAuth. It's about authorization, not about the identity. Now, let us translate these analogies into technical reality. SAML is the enterprise workhorse. It has been around since the early 2000s. It uses XML-based messages called assertions. The identity provider, like Google, Microsoft, Okta, Auth0, sends a signed assertion to the service provider saying this person is authenticated. Here is who they are. That is SAML in works. OIDC or OpenID Connect is another standard. When you click sign in with Google on a website, that is OIDC. It uses JSON Web Tokens, or in short JWTs, which are lighter and easier to work with than XML. OIDC is the modern standard for consumer-facing and cloud-native applications. OAuth is specifically about authorization, not authentication. It answers the specific question: what is this application allowed to do on behalf of the user? When you authorize a calendar app to read your Google Calendar, that is OAuth. You can get the information and definition of these protocols in detail using just AI search. I'm not going to repeat it in this video. Now let's go through one by one action, and also let us try to configure each of them using sample applications. So let me briefly explain. OAuth0 that we are going to use in this video, I'm only using it because it's freely available. You can also set it up and follow along. Let's get started. For this demo of these protocols, we will use Auth0. So you can follow along and set it up. Let's create a new account. I will create an account here. I agree. Let's go. They sent an email. So let's see the email. So I received the email. Let's go and enter it here. Let's create a password. Something here. Let's copy it for later for me. So let's say personal. I don't need advanced settings. Let's keep it simple. So we logged into Auth0 using the account we just created. Now let's create a SAML application as a service provider, and Auth0 will be identity provider. To learn the difference between identity provider and service provider, you can just Google it for SAML. You can use any AI, it will explain you in a minute. I don't want to repeat it again to make this video useful for you in terms of learning it actually how to implement SAML. So let's first create one user that we want to authenticate going forward with this user at your company application, like this Auth0 as identity provider. We have created this user. Now let's create an application for SAML. Let's call it as APA SAML. Let's create it as a regular application. Now we do not need to select the application type, but what we need to do is, since this is a SAML based application, we are going to do single sign-on for this application using SAML. In Auth0, you need to enable that configuration for this protocol. So it is here. In other products, it could be somewhere else.
the configuration where we need to add details about the SAML service provider. So in Auth0, it's giving details about this identity provider, which we need to give it on the target application. Before we enable the SAML configuration on our identity provider, let us go and configure the service provider. So for the demo, there is a simple test application that you can use as a service provider for SAML. It is called samlsp.com, and here it is just a testing tool. So you can basically use this as a service provider, the target application. So you need to upload the IDP, identity provider metadata file, or you can set it up manually. For example, we can just either copy this each manually and then we need to manually set it up. But in our case, in most cases, you can always copy the configuration from here. So for example, you can download the entire metadata file. It will be like an XML file. So if you open it, let me open it now, that one. So it will be like this. This is the SAML metadata file. We just downloaded it, and it has all the information of the unique entity ID, the identity provider, basically identifier, and what are all the attributes you send within this SAML message. When you authenticate the user and send it to the target application, you send some attributes of the user. So that is all there. So it's like a contract between the analogy we discussed between the concert organizer and your employer. So employer is identity provider Auth0 here, and the concert organizing company is service provider samlsp.com. So here it also has certificate with which this every message that is sent from identity provider to service provider is signed with. So when you import this one here, this service provider knows that there was a contract established using this metadata file, and going forward it will trust the user and the SAML message that is coming from Auth0 without further validation. So let's go, and so I have imported the metadata file. So it's pretty much the same information you saw in this is available here, and now we need to configure on our Auth0 some information. So after authentication, Auth0 authenticates any user that we will see now in the demo. It has to send back to a URL on the service provider side. It's called as ACS, Assertion Consumer Service URL. You will learn about this when you learn the protocol in detail. I don't have to explain the definition of all this. So we keep it everything by default, but we need this. And now let's go to the other browser. So here, this is the callback URL that I just talked about, and you can enable debug when you are learning more, but for now let's enable this. So it's successfully saved. Now on the service provider side, we make it easy. In this test application, there is a login button on the application side. So when you click on this, it goes to our Auth0. This is our Auth0 tenant. So it knows which identity provider it needs to send based on the contract or the metadata we configured. So now let's log in with the demo user we created. So we log in as an employee user or a customer user. So now you see the user logged in and their information came here into the service provider. From identity provider, you see their email address, their name, their UPN, and all this information that was all shared in this metadata file that we imported earlier. So it is this email address, given name, surname, name ID, and all this are basically sent here. Since there was everything, now let's go back here. So that is all coming here. So this is a simple demo of the SAML protocol, how you can configure identity provider and how the metadata file is shared, which is like a contract between two applications or two organizations. And so that the end user, like in this case, this user demo one, can log in on the identity provider using the central login, and any application like this application here, which has a SAML binding with the identity provider, does not ask again for the authentication. So once they log in the Auth0 identity provider, they don't have to log in again. This is called single sign-on. So yep, this is SAML. Now let's close this and come back to applications again. Now let's see OIDC protocol and let's configure and test it. Let's create another application called AppB. This time it works with OIDC, so let's name it like this, and let's create it as a single page application. What we need is, let us try to use another sample application which is called OIDC debugger.com. This is a sample application which can act as the target application and basically help you to learn OIDC protocol and OAuth protocol. So what is the client ID? OIDC works differently, that it doesn't share metadata, but here you need this application that you created in identity provider Auth0, and you come back to the here under the client. It's like again a contract that you establish using the client ID, so that when this application requests a login, it knows which application configuration it needs to look for and what type of protocol this application is using. So in this case, we copied the client ID. There are different types of OIDC flows you can always learn on internet. So there are actually different types of protocols. Here you can learn. It's quite easy. So here we will try to use authorization code with PKCE. Please go and learn about this, how the flow works. Then you will understand what I'm doing here. But for learning, we have given the client ID, and this is the redirect URL, like the URL that needs to that is actually required by OIDC, where it needs to send after the login. So that's the one, and we need to give the authorization URL, which is the login URL. So which is basically something like this, but we need to copy this tenant URL. So now it's good. It knows it has to go to this URL to login, and client ID, everything is there. Okay. Now let's try to send a request and see if it fails. I think we need to, before that, we have to configure the redirect URL. An identity provider needs to know in OIDC protocol where it has to send to the application after the login. All the tokens like ID token, access token, and so everything is explained here, the different types of tokens. You can always learn about it. So we have configured the client ID, we have configured this, we told this application which is the identity provider, and these are all other parameters that makes OIDC secure. You can also learn about it. The other important component here is, or parameter here is the scope, which basically tells when it is an OpenID protocol. This is a default. You need to mention the scope, and these are all the extra scopes that you can ask identity provider. After identity provider authenticates the user, it can send email and other profile information. So you can ask other roles on some other whatever scope, but the basic scope is OpenID. Now let's send a request from here. So this is how the request looks like. Let's try to send it as a form post type. You can also look at what kind of response you need it from identity provider, whether it has to send everything in query or form post. Let's keep it form post. So this is how a URL will be constructed from the service provider or the application to request a OIDC handshake with the identity provider. So this is the login URL that we configured here at the start here. So on the service provider, it looks different. It could be an application like Entra ID, Okta, or Ping, but here to keep it simple, I've just used this test application. So this is how the URL will look like when we trigger. It will be like a login button on the application that user might click, but here let's use send request. So now it knows where it has to go. So it came to the Auth0. Now let's log in again using the demo user we created on identity provider. So here we just enter user ID password like an employee or a customer. And here now you see on this application, it nicely presents what kind of tokens are sent from the identity provider. So it matches the return state. It makes every transaction, the state parameter will be different, so it makes it secure. An additional security, of course, along with the signature algorithms that are actually requested. So it is RS265 for this application. And the important thing is you get the tokens in the base64 encoded format. here once it comes back, you can use any decoder like JWT. It's a JSON web token, the type of tokens. So this application already decodes it, but for debugging purposes, if you have to know in environment, you can just copy that token and then you will know pretty much the same thing. So here it tells you demo and what are all we asked a profile scope here, right? So that's why it sent everything, and also it sent email and everything else is the default information that comes back, and this is the public key that it signs with. It's a very simple demo of this protocol, but you can learn more and more about it. So since we asked to send the request back after the login in form post, it sends as a form key value pairs, the access token, ID token, and when does it expire after 7,200 seconds, and what was the scope we agreed. So this is pretty much about OIDC protocol. You can do logout from here using a logout endpoint, which are also important like logout, and there is something called well-known OpenID configuration for each identity provider, which basically gives you all the URLs, all the endpoints that are exposed for an OpenID protocol by an identity provider. So learn about those, use ChatGPT or some AI, try to learn along with while you are building the lab. It is very, very useful and you learn it. The third one now we need to learn or know here is OAuth. OAuth is like a predecessor, the protocol before OIDC. So OAuth was mainly used between service to service authorizations. It will not have authentication. So for example, if a user logs into an application like here, and this application has a link for a Google Calendar. So instead of again authenticating user to the Google, what this application does is asks identity provider here using a protocol called Auth0 protocol to that this user wants to access Google Calendar. Please give me an access token. So it will be an access token. So for example, here let's create an application, a new application API. Let's call it as Google Calendar API. I created it just to see if it works. So this is the API service that we configure in identity provider. So when somebody requests for that API access token, we can configure the permissions and everything here for what permissions identity provider can give on behalf of the user. So there is no login. So user already logged in using SAML or OpenID Connect, but they want to use Google API, and this application decides when somebody clicks on the Google Calendar link, it should not give more than read permissions or write permissions, like that. Based on the user, you can configure based on the user on the API level. So that's the permission you can add here. So now to go back, so we have the API. Now what we need to learn is, let's try to configure this as the default API. So when somebody comes to an access token, they usually send it in the URL like the audience equal to Google, whatever we did there. So like this, but here this application we are using, it doesn't use that. So that's why we will do some magic here. We change the default API that is exposed by identity provider. So we will change the default API here. I don't know, where is it? I forgot. This one, default audience. So we can select it as Google Calendar. So when whoever requests for this API, for the API access token, it assumes that they are always asking for Google Calendar. But in ideal world, they actually each application requests using the audience parameter. We again request one more access token, so that now we request OIDC, the initial login. Now it says a invalid request. So it says client is not authorized to access resource server, which is good. Now we have to go here. So I think we need to give application access to this API. So this app B that we configured here, using this application, we are trying to access Google API, right? But on identity provider side, this user is not authorized. Sorry, this application is not authorized. So we need to just authorize this application to use Google as the service, Google API as the service. Why is this also not here? Let's just give both the permissions. Now it's both authorized. Send request again. Now we have one more misconfiguration. I think maybe this. The access token is different from the OIDC flow we have seen. That access token was default access token, which was just used internally within the app, this app. But here the request was made for Google Calendar API. So that's why the access token is properly sent by identity provider with an audience that in this application, this Open Connect Debugger test application we are using, can also access Google Calendar API using this access token on behalf of the user. So when there is a Google Calendar link that user clicks it, it has the access token that passes it to the Google API, which is basically configured to accept this token using the OAuth protocol. Again, that's it. And I try to keep it very, very simple so that these URLs, I will also put them into the description field so that please test it yourself. So you can always use ChatGPT, any other AI as a bouncing board if there are any errors like we have seen, so that you will actually understand how each of these protocols, SAML, OIDC, OAuth works. So that's the demo.
We learned a lot about these three protocols. If you are really serious about understanding the IAM concepts and make a career in IAM, I have put together a detailed guide to help you with week-by-week plan along with 90-day roadmap. Check the link in the description or comment below IAM guide. I'll send you the link to it. If you found this useful, don't forget to subscribe. I will see you in the next one.